This is the story of Trafford Park, a tale of deer, steel, gas trams, and a wildly ambitious canal project. If you want to experience the full rise, fall, and weird rebirth of this industrial estate, go ahead and skip to the next section. But if you're just here for the highlights, I got you. Here's the TLDR Trafford Park edition. This plot of land started out as a tranquil deer park owned by a family so old they basically predate surnames. Then, in true Victorian fashion, it got bought by a financier with big dreams and questionable judgment. He turned it into the world's first industrial estate. Early highlights include gas-powered trams that immediately derailed, and I mean immediately, a boating lake that became a chemical swamp, and a hotel for industrialists that only allowed gentlemen. Fast forward, and the place becomes a manufacturing monster, pumping out electric turbines, radio broadcasts, and tens of thousands of bomber engines during World War II. Then the post-war era hit, and like a lot of heavy industry, it aged badly. The canals couldn't handle container ships, the jobs disappeared, and someone decided the village housing was so depressing, it should be erased from existence. But wait, the 80s brought Regeneration. Capitalism got a facelift, and now you've got an avant-garde war museum shaped like a broken world, a nature reserve full of weasels, and a tram line that takes you straight to retail therapy. Somehow it's still standing, and somehow it works. Just a few miles outside of Manchester city centre is a place you've probably never thought much about, Trafford Park. These days, it's an industrial estate, but not just any estate. It was the first planned one in the world. And for over 100 years, it stayed the largest in Europe. Quietly impressive, right? What makes it interesting, besides that it kind of looks like it was drawn inside a moat, is that it's almost completely surrounded by water. On two sides, you've got the Bridgewater Canal, and on the other two, the Manchester Ship Canal. It's basically a fortress of factories, wrapped in a ribbon of water. But before all that, it was just the home of the Trafford family, real upper crust stuff. Generations lived there until the 1890s when they sold the whole thing to a financier named Ernest Terra Hooley, who we'll get to in more detail soon. Let's just say he had a lot of ambition and a creative relationship with money. Hooley's vision was to turn this estate into a booming industrial zone by building along the canal. Makes sense. Manchester Ship Canal had just opened, and everyone expected it to bring in a flood of shipping traffic. Only it didn't. Not right away, at least. So in the meantime, Trafford Park kind of wandered into this weird limbo stage. It had big industrial dreams, but while it was waiting for ships to show up, it leaned into leisure. People came here to golf, to play polo, to boat. Imagine a half-built business park where someone sets up a country club. Then, British Westinghouse stepped in. They were one of the first major companies to take the gamble. And it really paid off for them and for the park. By 1903, they were employing around 6,000 people. Half of everyone working in the park was working for British Westinghouse. That kicked off Trafford Park's transformation into a major engineering center, not just for Manchester, but for the entire country. And that's just the overview. The story's just warming up. Let's rewind to a time when Trafford Park wasn't factories and freight, it was scenery. Picture a vast tree-lined deer park, meadows, grasslands, and a stately avenue that sounds like it came straight out of a Jane Austen novel. This was the ancestral estate of the de Trafford family, who had been around since, the year 1200. Old money, deep roots. They started out in what's now Old Trafford, then moved into a place called Whittleswick Hall, later renamed Trafford Hall, because apparently every grand house back then needed a rebrand. By the 1700s, the park held the hall, the grounds, and 3 farms with names like Park Farm and Moss Farm. Very literal, very quaint. In 1761, something changed. The Bridgewater Canal sliced along the southeast and southwest edges, adding a water boundary to go with the existing River Irwell. That little addition gave the estate a sort of island-like vibe. Still pretty, but increasingly strategic. Fast forward to 1882, a group of engineers and business minds set up in Didsbury and said, "You know what we need? A big old ship canal." But Sir Humphrey de Trafford was not thrilled. He fought it tooth and nail. His reasons? He didn't want dirty water near his fancy lawn. He also thought the canal would ruin his drainage and make his beloved Trafford Hall unlivable. Spoiler alert, he lost. The Manchester Ship Canal got the green light in 1885 and construction began in 1888. By the time it opened in 1894, Trafford Park was suddenly looking like prime real estate for industry. A big wall went up to block the view of the canal, a couple of private wharves were built for the de Traffords, and the industrial age was ready to roll in. But not before one final, slightly tragic note. The deer were allowed to hang out for a bit until someone decided they didn't exactly pair well with heavy machinery, and by 1900, they were gone. So in 1896, Sir Humphrey's son, tired of battling industrial fate, put the entire 1,183-acre estate up for auction. It didn't sell at first, but then along came Ernest Terahuli, financier, flamboyant, maybe a little too confident for his own good. He bought Trafford Park for 360,000 euros, which sounds like a steal now, but was about 52.6 million euros in today's money. And here's the kicker. Just a few months later, he sold it to a company he created, Trafford Park Estates Ltd, with himself as chairman, at a massive profit. Classic. The original plan? A little of everything. Racetrack, housing, cycle factory, and obviously that canal frontage. But things were slow to start. Hooley brought in Marshall Stevens, general manager of the Ship Canal Company, and they both saw the bigger picture. This was not just a fancy estate anymore. This could be the industrial estate. Stevens became managing director in 1897 and stuck around for over 30 years. At first, they didn't build anything themselves. They just leased out the land. But in the beginning, barely 1% of the estate was in use, so they had to get creative. Trafford Hall turned into a gentleman-only hotel. The stables hosted livestock auctions. The lake was leased out for boating. A polo ground popped up, and in 1902, the Manchester Golf Club laid out a full course right there in the park. By 1908, the company changed tactics. Instead of waiting for others to build, they started making their own buildings, flexible industrial spaces called hives that could be reconfigured for tenants. Think of them like modular office spaces, 1900s edition. There were also enormous fireproof warehouses called safes, strong enough to hold 50,000 bales of cotton. Because even in 1908, fire insurance was no joke. Once the spark caught, the place exploded with industry. First came the Manchester Patent Fuel Company in 1898, then Trafford Brick Company, timber merchants, cable makers, and eventually some serious powerhouses. Literally, one of the early companies, Glover's, even built a power station. But the real game changer was British Westinghouse. In 1899, this American electrical giant bought up 130 acres and built a facility so massive the main machine shop was nearly 900 feet long. By 1903, they were employing 6,000 people, half the workforce of Trafford Park. This wasn't just a factory, it was the crown jewel of British engineering for nearly a century. Meanwhile, the Cooperative Wholesale Society set up shop with a flour mill and food packing plant. Then Ford arrived in 1911, assembling Model Ts like a well-oiled machine, until they moved to Dagenham in 1931. By the 1930s, over 200 American companies had set up operations in the park. Even as the local cotton industry declined, Trafford Park helped keep Manchester and southern Lancashire afloat. During World War I, it pivoted to war supplies, chemicals, munitions, the whole arsenal. And then, unexpectedly, Trafford Park helped invent radio. In 1922, Metropolitan Vickers set up one of Britain's first radio stations, 2ZY, right in their factory. It was later folded into the BBC, which makes Trafford Park partly responsible for the invention of tea time crime dramas and the shipping forecast. Irony alert, after selling off the land, the de Trafford family still held on to a slice of the pie, about 1,300 acres across the canal. Over time, bits of that land were sold off too, often to the estates company or the ship canal company. In the late 1920s, they had this dream of building a little garden village called Dumplington Estates. That didn't exactly pan out. The ship canal company eventually took over the land and renamed it Barton Dock Estate, a place destined for a dock that never got built. Classic overpromise. Eventually, though, the area would become home to the Trafford Centre, which opened in 1998. But that's jumping ahead. Trafford Park went all in on the war effort during World War II. It produced everything from Lancaster bombers to Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same ones that powered Spitfires and Hurricanes. Ford built a brand new facility just to make them and turned out over 34,000 engines before the war was through. They even designed the factory in 2 separate chunks, so if one half got bombed, the other could keep running. It did get bombed a few days after opening. F. Hills and Sons built over 800 Percival Proctor aircraft, and other companies made bridges, munitions, tank parts. Basically, if it exploded or supported something that did, Trafford Park had a hand in it. It was even home to the UK's first large-scale penicillin production facility thanks to ICI. Of course, the place was heavily bombed during the Manchester Blitz, especially in December of 1940. The Metropolitan Vickers factory lost 13 aircraft in final assembly. Trafford Hall was so badly damaged it was torn down, and yes, stray bombs hit Old Trafford Stadium too. Twice. Manchester United ended up playing home games at Main Road, their rival stadium, until 1949. At the start of the war, about 50,000 people worked in the park. By 1945, it was 75,000. And Metropolitan Vickers alone employed 26,000. It was the height of Trafford Park's power. But nothing industrial lasts forever. Starting in the 1960s, the decline began. Newer, shinier factories were being built elsewhere, and Trafford Park started to feel outdated. The canals couldn't support the larger container ships that defined global shipping now, and employment dropped hard. From 50,000 in 1967 to just 15,000 by 1976. The 1980s weren't kind either. Industry had mostly vanished. An attempt to revive the area by declaring it an enterprise zone didn't really move the needle as expected. They aimed to create 7,000 new jobs in a decade, and they managed about 2,500. Oof. But then, in 1987, the Trafford Park Development Corporation was formed. Over the next 11 years, it sparked a real comeback. 1,000 companies, 28,299 new jobs, and 1.76 billion euros in investment. Big numbers, big turnaround. By 2025, Trafford Park was back on the map with 1,400 companies and 40,000 people working there. Not quite the wartime peak, but for a place that almost turned into a forgotten golf course, that's a win. So by now, Trafford Park had gone from deer pasture to wartime powerhouse to economic comeback story. But while all of that was happening, someone had to be in charge of actually running the place. It was messy. At the end of the 19th century, when factories first started popping up, Trafford Park was not neatly managed by one council. Oh no. The eastern part, where most of the early action happened, fell under Stretford Urban District, and the western side belonged to Barton Upon Irwell. Two councils, one increasingly complicated industrial estate. Naturally, tension started simmering. The estates company, which owned and managed the park, needed basic infrastructure. Electricity, roads, that sort of thing. And they expected the local government to step up. But Stretford Council was less than cooperative. So, in 1902, one of the park's bigger tenants, W.T. Glover and Company, said, fine, we'll just do it ourselves. And they built a power station right next to their cable factory to supply electricity to the whole park. Before that, the estates company had tried to get help from Manchester Corporation, but Stretford wouldn't allow another city to run wires on their turf. Classic local politics. Because then came Manchester's big pitch. A formal merger with Stretford. Their logic? We built the canal, we funded the canal, and we're kind of the reason this is even a thing. Manchester had poured a third of the funding into the ship canal project and had doubled its municipal debt to make it happen. But despite all of that, Stretford and Lancashire County Council basically said, thanks, but no thanks. The government shut down the merger after a formal inquiry. By 1906, things had gotten real petty. There were newspaper complaints about the condition of Trafford Park Road, so Stretford demanded that every business along the street cough up money to fix it. Cue the outrage. Then came more back and forth over road maintenance until finally the estates company tried to petition to become its own urban district, to break free from Stretford entirely. Lancashire County Council rejected the idea, but a compromise of sorts came later that year. A new park ward was created within Stretford, just for Trafford Park. Well, for part of Trafford Park. The western section stayed under Barton Upon Irwell because apparently shared custody agreements aren't just for kids. In the long run, none of that lasted. Thanks to the Local Government Act of 1972, the borough of Stretford was dissolved, and on April 1st, 1974, Trafford Park officially became part of the newly formed Metropolitan Borough of Trafford, the setup we still have today. So who speaks for the park? In terms of modern politics, Trafford Park mostly falls under the Gorse Hill and Colnbrook ward. A small bit on the west edge belongs to Lowestoft and Barton, so the whole two authorities thing, it actually still lingers, just with new names. Parliament-wise, the entire estate lives under Stretford and Urmston constituency. As of 2025, it's represented by Labour MP Andrew Western. So yes, for an estate that started with deer and drainage ditches, Trafford Park has had quite the complicated civic life. So once the bureaucratic tug-of-war settled down, at least mostly, Trafford Park was left to do what it does best: exist, expand, and sprawl out across an oddly perfect patch of land, which brings us to geography. Trafford Park isn't exactly a land of hills and dramatic cliffs. It's flat, impressively, almost stubbornly flat. The highest point is just 144 feet above sea level, which makes it ideal for moving heavy equipment around without gravity getting in the way. Underneath all that industrial sprawl is Triassic bunter sandstone. Fun to say, less fun to build on. Covered with sand and gravel that dates back to the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago. So yeah, there's a prehistoric glacier to thank for this whole setup. But not all of that land was ready to go from the start. The western part of Trafford Park used to be full-blown peat bog, specifically an area called Trafford Moss, not exactly prime real estate. It was soggy, soft, and a little bit haunted looking, probably. Enter William Roscoe in the 1790s. He began draining the bog in 1793, and by 1798, it was stable enough for him to shift his focus to an even bigger swamp nearby, Chatmoss, over in Salford, also owned by the Trafford family because apparently they were collecting wetlands like Pokemon cards. Once drained, Trafford Park became what it is today, a solid 4.7 square miles of flat land neatly cradled by canals on all sides. The Bridgewater Canal runs along the southeast and southwest. The Manchester Ship Canal frames the northeast and the northwest. Together, they give the park its unusual industrial island feel, a mode of logistics, if you will. Fun fact, it's also the most northerly area of Trafford, brushing right up against Salford Quays and Greater Manchester proper. Basically, it's the fringe of one borough and the threshold of another, a spot that's always been more crossroads than center. So now that we know the land itself was flat, industrial, and bordered by canals like some kind of logistical Venice, the next logical question is, who lived there? After all, factories don't run themselves, and someone had to live close enough to punch in on time. That's where the village comes in. Back in 1898, a sizable chunk of land was sold to Edmund Nuttall and Company, with plans to build 1,200 houses. Big ambitions, except they didn't build all of them. The land sat quiet for a bit until British Westinghouse announced they were moving in, and suddenly now everyone needed housing. Cue Trafford Park Dwellings Ltd, formed in 1899 with a clear goal: build homes fast, because thousands of workers were about to descend on the park. They took over Nuttall's land and got to work. By 1903, over 500 houses were up, and 1904, that number passed 700. They called it Trafford Park Village, but around here it was just the village. The layout was efficient, a strict grid with numbered roads instead of names. Streets 1 through 12 ran east-west, avenues 1 through 4 ran north-south. It wasn't poetic, but it got the job done. In the village, it wasn't just housing. It was self-contained. Shops, a school, a social club, even its own police station. There were 3 churches, all made of corrugated iron, a Methodist chapel, St. Cuthbert's, and St. Anthony's. Eventually, only St. Anthony's survived, still open today, and still housing the altar and stained glass windows donated by Lady Annette de Trafford, salvaged from the old Trafford Hall Chapel. But let's be honest, for all its practicality, the village didn't exactly win awards for quality of life. It was too close to the pollution-heavy factories. The streets were narrow, there weren't many gardens, and over time, it started to resemble the surrounding industrial slums. Critics were vocal about it even early on. By the 1970s, Stretford Council decided it just was not fit for modern living anymore. The first wave of demolitions came in the mid-70s, nearly 300 houses gone. In the 1980s, another 325 followed, and in the end, only the largest 84 homes were left standing. So the village, once built to house a dream of industrial prosperity, became a footnote in Trafford Park's evolution, a place that tried to balance work and life, but eventually tilted too far into the shadow of its own smokestacks. So after all the bricks, factories, and bulldozed homes, you might be wondering, what still stands in Trafford Park that you can actually visit? Not just where people worked or lived, but the places where history settled in and stayed. Turns out there's actually a couple standouts. One bold, one quiet, and both deeply tied to what came before. First up, the Imperial War Museum North, sitting right at Trafford Wharf, on the edge of the ship canal, staring directly across at Salford Quays, like the two are still mid-argument. It opened in 2002, and right away made a statement, not just with the exhibits, but with its architecture. This was the first UK building by Daniel Libeskind, who went full deconstructivist with it. The structure is broken into 3 interlocking shards: earth, air, and water, meant to symbolize a world shattered by war. It's not subtle. You enter through the air shard, which is 180 feet tall and open to the elements. Very dramatic, very on brand. There's a viewing platform near the top, about 90 feet up, that lets you take in views of Salford, the quays, and even Manchester city centre, if the weather isn't being especially British that day. Inside, you'll find 2 major exhibition spaces. One is a rotating gallery for special exhibits, and the other is a massive permanent showcase covering every major conflict from 1900 to the present day. It's not just tanks and uniforms either. It's deeply immersive, emotionally weighty, and layered with personal stories. The other major landmark tells a quieter story, one of recovery. Trafford Ecology Park sits on what used to be the ornamental boating lake, back when the park was still trying to impress potential industrialists with picnics and paddle boats. Boating happened here until the 1930s, but eventually the water got, and this is the less technical term, gross. Thanks to asbestos and oil leaks from the Anglo-American oil depot, the lake turned into more of a chemical soup. Then came World War II, and the site was used as a dumping ground for foundry waste because apparently "we'll clean it later" was the official post-war motto. In 1974, Esso bought the land and did the bare minimum to tidy it up, just enough to make it look nicer from their site. In 1983, Trafford Council bought it for €50,000, which would be about 213,000 euros today, with plans to turn it into a public space. Government spending freezes delayed the project for a while, but by 1990, the Ecology Park officially opened. Today, it's about a third of the lake's original size, but what it lacks in scale, it makes up for in wildlife. We've got foxes, weasels, rabbits, hedgehogs, lapwings, kestrels, herons, coot, Canada geese, and even newts. Plural. It's a full-on nature recovery zone, officially recognized as a local nature reserve since 2007. One of only 2 in all of Trafford. It's managed by Groundwork Greater Manchester now and quietly thrives as a green haven tucked inside the edges of an industrial legacy. So you've got war museums, a lake full of newts, and a heavy-duty industrial past. But how did people and cargo actually get into Trafford Park? It wasn't easy at first. Transit here has always been experimental. So let's go back to the late 1800s. At the time, there were basically no public transport routes in Trafford Park. None. Zilch. So the estates company took matters into their own hands and commissioned a gas-powered tramway. First tram ran in July 1897. A few days later, it derailed. So they put the whole thing on pause. When it did work, the trams maxed out at 12 miles an hour. It gave off a heavy smell of burning gas and earned the delightful nickname Lamp Oil Express. Cozy. The British Gas Traction Company ran the service and paid a cut to the estates company, but by 1899, they'd gone into voluntary liquidation. Things really started to unravel when Salford Corporation refused to supply gas. Petty, but efficient. In 1900, the estates company bought the whole operation for €2,000 just to keep it going. By 1903, an electric tramway was introduced, and Manchester and Salford corporations took it over in 1905. The gas trams limped along until 1908, then got replaced by steam locomotives. Meanwhile, between 1904 and 1907, guests staying at Trafford Hall got shuttled around in an actual horse-drawn bus, which was upgraded to a motor car by 1907. Fancy. Freight needed infrastructure too. In 1898, the Estates Company and the Ship Canal Company struck a deal. Build a rail connection between the docks and the park. They even created a new company, the West Manchester Light Railway Company, just to take over tram operations and lay more track. The Trafford Park Act of 1904 gave the park's own company full control over its roads and railways. That meant they could expand the network without waiting for Parliament's blessing, a rare bit of government efficiency. At its peak, Trafford Park's internal railway network stretched 26 miles and moved 2.5 million tons of cargo in a single year. 1940 naturally, but like most things tied to steam and steel, it started declining in the 1960s and officially closed in 1998. Still, parts of the old tracks are just there, quietly resting and remembering things. And here's a fun one. Trafford Park was also home to Manchester's first purpose-built airfield. It opened in 1911, tucked between Trafford Park Road, Maudesley Road, and Ashburton Road. The first plane that landed that July, flown in from Liverpool by Henry G. Melly. The airfield was in use during the early years of World War I and possibly stuck around until 1918, when it was replaced by Alexandra Park Aerodrome. So if you're into obscure aviation trivia, there's your fix. So that's Trafford Park, a patch of Greater Manchester that went from noble estate to wartime powerhouse to surprisingly peaceful ecological reserve. It has its layers: deer, trams, engines, newts, and it's still evolving. And whether you came for the industrial history, the architectural symbolism, or just to hear the phrase Lamp Oil Express, thanks for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this weird little talk through time, feel free to like, subscribe, or just mutter, that was interesting, as you click and walk away. Either way, I'll see you in the next one.